Alrighty, so these are still quadratics. Quadratics mean the highest exponent is 2. So these are all quadratics. What we're doing today is doing two things: factoring and solving. We're going to factor everything. Sometimes we'll solve. When do we know when to solve? When it says solve. When it says solve, we're going to use all of these steps, which are on the board as well. Okay? All of these steps when it says solve. When it just says factor, we're not going to use the last step. Okay? Okay, so let's look at example number 1. Let's jump right into it because a lot of you guys are like, this looks familiar. It probably will look familiar. So it says factor. It doesn't say solve anywhere. It says factor the trinomial. It says trinomial because there's 3 terms. X squared, negative 2x, negative 8. Those are 3 terms, right? So that's why it's called a trinomial. Okay. So our first step says set equation equal to 0. Is that guy an equation? No. Yeah, how do we know it's not an equation? No equal sign, yeah. If it doesn't have an equal sign, it's not an equation. It's just an expression. So we can't set it equal to 0 if there is no equal sign. So we skip that step. Step 2 is GCF, greatest common factor. We're going to do that on Wednesday. So we're going to skip step 2 for today. I put it up there because it is important, but we won't see anything where we need to do that. That'll be on Wednesday. So let's go to step 3, ABC. So we got to figure out what is A, what is B, what is C, just kind of like you did on your quiz. A equals, B equals, C equals. Okay? Now, we're not going to find things like axis of symmetry, y-intercept, vertex. We're not doing that today. But it still has an A, B, and C because it's in standard form. Okay, so what is A for this guy? 1, positive 1, right? The positive 1 in front. What is B? Negative 2, and C? Negative 8, right? So we're going to do the next step, which probably looks familiar to some of you. Some teachers call it the X method. Some teachers call it the diamond method. It's all the same. On top, you have a multiplication. There's a little multiplication dot. On bottom, there's an addition. Okay? So we're going to fill this in. On top with the dot, with the multiplication dot, we do A times C. Okay? A is 1, C is negative 8. So negative 8 times positive 1 is negative 8. That goes on top. B always goes by itself on bottom. Negative 2. Okay, so now this part we got to do in our heads, mental math. What 2 numbers, when I multiply, make negative 8, but when I add them together, make negative 2? So some of you can kind of do it in a quick. How do you do this if you don't know to? Well, list all the numbers that make negative 8 when you multiply. Let's see. So we get negative 1 times positive 8. Negative 2 times positive 4. Then you got negative 8 times positive 1. Negative 4 times positive 2, right? All of those make negative 8. Well, which one of them also adds up to be negative 2? That guy right there, right? So that's the guy we want. That's the guy we want. These are all factors. It's called factors. Things that multiply are called factors. Okay, so we're going to go back over here, and I'm going to put a negative 4 and a positive 2. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this thing. It's got 4 spots in it. It kind of looks like a window, but it's actually a table. So it's got 4 sections. I'm going to fill this window in, fill this table in. So how to fill it in? Well, the first term at the very beginning, the first term I should say, 1x squared. that's going to go always in this box here. The last term, -8, always goes in the last box here. Whatever's there goes there. Whatever's in front goes there. Whatever's last goes there. So what goes in the two ones I haven't filled in? There you go. Yeah, the ones that I figured out right now. -4 and +2. Which one goes first? It doesn't matter. You can put -4 first, or you can put -2 first. It doesn't matter. I could have switched those, the yellows. Yellows are interchangeable. Okay, so, but what is important is when I add these two guys up, -4 and 2, they have to make this middle term here. So what do they need to make -2x? They need an x, right? So I got to give them an x. That's what they need. This guy needs an x. That guy needs an x. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is reverse multiplication. So this is kind of a multiplication table, like the multiplication tables you have in your back. Because when they add up together, they have to make this middle term here. Because you know how the blue comes from the blue, the red, the green comes from the green, the yellows have to add together to make that middle term. Okay, yeah. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, this is kind of like a multiplication table, like you guys have at the back of your, right? Multiplication tables, you're like this times this makes this number. Well, that's what we're doing. So we got to figure out what two things multiply to make this guy here. So let's start with the x squared. What times what makes x squared? Times itself, right? X times x makes x squared. They're both ones, right? So that makes the 1 there. You don't need to write the 1 in the front. Okay, so now that I know that, what times x is going to need to make -4x? -4 times x makes -4x. So I'm going to put a -4 or a -4 up top there. Okay, one more. X times something makes +2x. So what do I need on the left? On here, down here, a +2. How do you know you did that right? Because they should both multiply at the end and make the green. -4, +2 make -8. If that works, then you did it right. Everything else works. Okay. Last step. Put those two factors together. X minus 4, x plus 2. You're done. We don't have to do the last step because it didn't say solve. So once we get these two guys like that, we're done. Okay. That process we just did is factoring. Factoring a trinomial. Okay. All right, so let's do that one more time. Let's go to example number 2. So go on the inside, example number 2. Nope. I could put x plus 2 first and x minus 4 second. Yep. So why do you do the square if they cover answers? Great question. I'm going to answer that on the next problem because that won't always be the case. Yeah, that won't always be the case. So let's look at example number 2. No equation. So we can't set it equal to 0. Skip step number 2 for today. So let's go right to ABC. What is A? What is B? What is C? So for this guy here, What is A going to be? Positive 3, good. What is B? Positive 10, and C is positive 8, all positives. Then we go to the X. A times C goes at the top. So 3 times 8 makes 24. And then B always goes at the bottom. So now I got to figure out two numbers that multiply to be 24 and add to be 10. 6 and 4. Go to your table now. I need 4 sections on my table. The first term was 3x squared. That goes in the first box. The last term was positive 8. That goes in the last section. And then the two guys I came up with, positive 6 and positive 4, add together to make 10x. So one needs a 6x and one needs a 4x. Now the two yellow guys, order doesn't matter. Order does not matter. I could put the 6x with the 4x and switch them. The blue and the green, they do matter. Those order matter. That order matters, but the yellow does not. Okay. So start with the blue section first. What times what? I'm not worried about the 3. Don't worry about the 3 yet. What times what makes x squared? X times itself again, right? So we start there. Problem is it's not a 1x squared. It's a 3x squared. So I need a 3 to go with one of them, not both of them. I can't put a 3 here and a 3 here because then that makes 9. I don't have a 9. I have a 3. So I can put a 3 here, or I can put it over here. Where does it go? Well, it goes where it fits. So let's say I have a 3 here. Let's say I chose that. Is there a number that I go 3 times a number that makes positive 4 down here? No, right? But if I put the 3 here, is there a number 3 times something that makes 6? So it's going to fit there. That's where it'll fit. Because here I can just put a positive 2 and it works. And then over here I need a positive 4. So I have 3x plus 4 and x plus 2. So when you put it into Delta Math, parentheses and everything. Just like picture that's the box in Delta Math. Parentheses 3x plus 4, parentheses x plus 2, one box. Because we have one answer. Even though there's two parts to it, we have one answer. Okay. All right. So the next ones, we're going to have to do step 1 because it says solve. All right, so let's look at number 3. Example number 3. Okay, example number 3, it says solve, and there's an equal sign. So we have to do step 1. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do step 1 now. All right, so the first thing we do, anytime we have an equal sign and it says solve, I'm going to draw my blue line to separate, just like we've been doing since the beginning of the year. Step 1 says I have to get it one side to equal 0. So either this side of the blue line or this side of the blue line, I need to be 0. None of them are 0 right now. Well, I see I can make this a 0, though. Negative 7x, I can combine it with the negative 6x over here. But to do that, I have to do the opposite because I'm crossing the blue line. So instead of negative 7x, I'm going to do the opposite and add 7x to both sides. We've done this lots of times. Now, that gets rid of that from that side. And I get positive 1x over here. Bring everything else down I haven't used. Close. I got rid of the negative 7x. Now I need to get rid of the negative or the positive 6. Well, I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. The only thing I can subtract it with on the other side is positive 4. Now I have 0. So I have negative 2 here, x squared plus 1x minus 2 equals 0. That's step 1. When you need to do that, you use it. You won't need to do that every time. Sometimes you do. Step 1 done. Step 2 we're going to skip for today. Skip 3 says ABC. Okay. So now that it's in standard form, there should be an A, there should be a B, and there should be a C. What's A? Positive 1. Yep, positive 1. B is also positive 1. C is negative 2. If I multiply A times C, I get negative 2. That goes at the top. B goes at the bottom. What are the two numbers that you multiply to be negative 2, but add to be positive 1? Positive 2, negative 1, yeah. Positive 2, negative 1. There's only two numbers that multiply to make 2, 2 and 1. One of them has to be negative. And since the bottom, since B is positive, that means the lower number, the smaller number has to be negative. Okay, so let's go to my table. One x squared goes here. Negative 2 goes in the last box, the last section of the box. And then the two guys I came up with go here and here. When they combine, they got to make positive 1x. So I'm going to give them an x as well. Okay. Multiplication table. What times what makes x squared? X times x. Okay. X times what makes positive 2x? Positive 2. And a negative 1 down here. Again, you'll know you did it right if the green matches up. Positive 2 times negative 1 makes negative 2. That makes sense. So I have an equal sign. It equals 0. So I can't forget about my equal sign. That's when we use the last step. The last step says set each of those parenthesis guys equal to 0 and solve for x. In other words, split and solve. So I'm going to split these two guys up. X plus 2 is going to get an equal 0. X minus 1 equals 0. And I'm going to solve. I'm going to get two answers. We've gotten two answers before. Subtract 2 on the first one. I get -2 as an answer. And I get +1 as an answer as well. So now I can answer one of those questions that you guys had last week. Remember we had P and Q were liars? Why were they liars? This is why right here. Doesn't that kind of look like P and Q together, right? It wasn't +2. What was the answer? -2. It wasn't -1. What was the answer? +1. That's why they're liars. Because of this step right here where I set them equal to 0 and solve for it. That's why they ended up being liars. Because when I solve, I set it equal to 0. We didn't do that step last week because I just said, trust me. But this week, this is why they're liars. Okay? Because the 0 is actually -2. Because if I were to plug in -2 there, wouldn't that make 0 here? If I were to plug in 1 here, wouldn't that make 0 there? That's why they're called zeros sometimes. Okay. Okay, so let's look at number 4 now. Number 4. Again, solve. Just because it says factor doesn't mean we only use the first 4 steps. If it says solve at all, we got to use all steps. So we're going to do the same thing we did on the last problem, use all of the steps. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is set it equal to 0. General rule of thumb, keep x squared. Anything with an x squared, keep it positive. Just because it's going to make your life easier as you go down these steps here. So if it has an x squared, keep it positive. So which has an x squared? 5, right? That's positive. So I'm going to leave that there. If I were to move this guy over here, I'd have to do the opposite and make it negative. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to move these two guys over here. Okay. So to go across the blue line, I have to do the opposite. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. Positive 10x minus 3 is positive 7x. Positive 3, positive 3. So we get 5x squared plus 7x minus 6. Now it's in standard form. I have an A, I have a B, I have a C. And it's equal to 0. So step 1 is done. Okay. Step 2 we're skipping for today. It's step 3, ABC. Yeah. Okay. So what is A, what is B, and what is C? Now that it's equal to 0. 5 is A. Good. 5 is A. B is 7. C is -6. Okay. Multiply A times C. I get negative 30. B goes on the bottom. So what are the two numbers that multiply to be the top, add to be the bottom? Multiply to be negative 30. So 10 times 3, 30 times 1, 6 times 5. I think that's it. So yeah, it would be positive 10 and negative 3. Okay, so let me fill in the box. 5x squared goes first. Negative 6 goes second. And then positive 10 with an x, negative 3 with an x. Remember, the yellows can be switched. You can put negative 3 and positive 10. The yellows can be switched. Okay. X times x. Well, the only way to make a 5 is 5 times 1. That's the only way to make a 5 using multiplication. So that means I need a 5 here or a 5 there. Not both, because that makes 25 now. So if I leave it up top, will that work? No, because it doesn't go into negative 3. So on the side, it's going to be needed on the side because it goes into positive 10. There we go. Positive 2 times and negative 3. Okay. Next step. Five x minus 3 parentheses x plus 2 parentheses equals 0 because it said solve and it had an equal sign. Last step, split and solve. 5x minus 3 equals 0. X plus 2 equals 0. Okay. Okay, so one of them I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And then I got to divide by 5. So it's 2 steps instead of 1 step. So I get a fraction, 3/5. Reduce it if you can. If you can't, leave it. It's done. Don't change it to a decimal, just leave it. The other guy, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. And I get a negative 2. I get 2 answers. So in Delta Math, when you get 2 different answers, 2 different boxes. One of the boxes is going to be 3/5. The other box is going to be negative 2. Don't put them in one box because it's technically 2 different answers. Okay. If it says factor, those guys you can put in one box. All of those guys in one box. But if it says solve and you get multiple answers, you have to put them in multiple boxes because it's multiple answers. Okay. All right. So let's look at number 5. Sorry, number 5. So number 5 is going to start the same way as what we've been doing. When you're doing this step, step 1, forgot to write it up here. Keep x squared positive. Keep x squared positive. So right now, is x squared positive? Positive 6. So let's leave it that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the other side. I'm going to get this side over here to be 0. Okay, so what does that involve? I got to do the opposite for negative 11x. So I'm going to add 11x to both sides. Can I add those to make 17? Yeah, they're not like terms. One's an x squared, one's an x, so I can't add them. I have a positive 6x squared and a positive 11x. And still a minus 3 over here. Okay, do the opposite with negative 3. So can I add 3 to 11 to make 14? Can I add 3 to 6 to make 9? No, I can't because they're not like terms. So where do I put it? I put it at the end because it's going to be in standard form. Plus 3, just positive 3. Step 1 done. Okay. Next step, ABC. A is positive 6. B is positive 11. C is positive 3. So 18 and 11. 3 times 6 is 18. B is positive 11. So what are the two numbers that multiply to be 18 but add up to be 11? 9 and 2. Okay, table. 6x squared, positive 3. I'm going to put a 9x and a 2x. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to make 6. I know it's x times x, but there's a couple different ways to make 6. I have 6 times 1 or 3 times 2. The correct answer is whatever works, whatever fits. So let's try 6 and 1. If I put a 6 here, would 6 go into 2 as well? No. It's okay. Let's move 6 then. Maybe 6 over here. Does 6 go into 9 evenly? Not evenly. So 6 and 1 are not going to work. What's the other option? 2 and 3. So if I put a 2 here and a 3 here, would that work? No. So let me switch 2 and 3. That seems to fit better. 2 goes into 2 once. 3 goes into 9 3 times. Last step, separate and solve. Two x plus 3 equals 0. 3x plus 1 equals 0. Okay. Subtract 3 from both sides because I want to solve for x. Divide by 2. So I get negative 3 over 2. One answer. The other one. Subtract 1, subtract 1. Divide by 3, divide by 3. Negative 1 over 3. Okay, just reduce them if you can. If you can't reduce them, leave them. Leave them as fractions. Don't change them to decimals. Don't change them to decimals because they're not needed. Unless it says round your answer, but it doesn't say round anywhere. Okay? Okay, so what we're going to do now is I got one more practice problem, and then we'll be done. So page 12, you're going to do this one on page 12, and then we'll be done for today. On page 12, you're going to tape this in, and we're going to do one more practice problem, and we'll be done. Example 6. So this one is just factor the trinomial. Four x squared plus 5x minus 9. This one just says factor the trinomial. Doesn't say solve anywhere, so you don't got to do the last step. There's no equal sign. If it wants you to solve, there will always be an equal sign. There's no equal sign, you can't solve. To be negative 36 and add to 5, was that 9 and negative 4? So with 4x squared, I have two options. I can go 2 times 2 or 4 times 1. Correct answer is whatever works, whatever fits. Like I can go 2 times 2, but that won't fit here. Because what would I put there, right? It would work here. I can put negative 2 here. That works there, but it doesn't work. So that means it has to be 4 times 1. And the 4 is going to go there. Thank you. Since it just said factor, we're done. One box, you're done. Okay, you don't have to solve it. All right. Okay, so pass the tape back until it makes it to everyone. Tape this in page 12, and we'll do some, tomorrow we're going to do some practice on Delta Math.